Data science pipelines. Typically, more data outperforms better algorithm, which means we often work with very, very large sets of data, usually by sending it through a pipeline. Remember, our goal is the true model, training data used to develop the model, validation data used to test during development, and testing data to test the final trained model, often called the gold standard. Remember, signal plus noise is model plus error. Remember Polya's method. So we have these 4 steps in order to carry out the data science version of Polya's problem. Pre-processing, representations, and computation, that's our algorithms, metrics. And we can think of that as a pipeline. Data goes to pre-processing, to representation, to algorithm, to metric, and that produces results. Typically, we have training data and we have testing data. We split the training data into training and validation. The testing data we move off by itself. We're not going to touch it until the end. And then our data goes through pre-processing and representation and algorithm, and then metrics, and then finally results. But you only use training data and validation to develop the pipeline. So you develop the pipeline for these 3 parts, metrics to assess every step actually. So you can think of the first 3 parts often are implemented in code. And then once you've finished your pipeline, you can apply it to the testing data and assess the model. For example, Cameo and osmanthus are 2 different types of rice. Here's pictures of them. We'd like to be able to distinguish them from each other if perhaps they were mixed in together. So researchers set up an optical system and obtained 7 features using imaging techniques for the 2 different classes of rice. These are the features or attributes: area, perimeter, major axis length, minor axis length, eccentricity, convex area, and extent. This is the reference for the paper. Here's the data. Notice the different orders of magnitude. And notice there are no missing values. So we have 3,810 different samples of the 2 classes of rice. So we begin by comparing the 2 different classes. Here are our 2 classes, Cameo and osmanthus. And if we do a group by, we see that there are about 1,630 of the Cameo and 2,180 of the osmanthus. Let's compare their means across these features. So you can see the area and the perimeter, maybe not that different, major axis length, minor axis length. So can we use these features to distinguish between these 2? Well, let's look at some histograms. This code produces the histograms. Here are our first 4 histograms for the 2 different classes of rice. And then here are 3 more. And you'll notice the major axis length and the perimeter look like they're fairly well separated. Now we're going to take the categorical class and replace it by a target of 0 and 1. You can see that here. This is just the first 4, but everything in the target column is 0s and 1s. And we can separate 20% of the data into a test set. And we're not going to touch the test set while the solution is being developed. So we'll develop our solution using dftrain, where dftrain is the result of this train test split. You can see the first 5 rows of that here. dftest we're not going to see again until we've developed our model and are ready to assess it. So here is our training information. Let's split the features from the target. And now we have the target is a separate array, and it's the response, and here is the description of the ones that we have remaining. Not surprisingly, we need to rescale the data. So if you noticed, we had different orders of magnitude, so let's do a standard scaler. And notice now we've standardized, so every column now has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. And we can compare these columns to each other now. Let's split our data so we can develop a solution using a random forest. And notice here that we're actually using validation data, because the testing data, we're going to use at the very end and we're not going to touch it until then. So this is training and validation data from our scaled features. Here's our random forest classifier. We fit it to the training data, scored on the validation data, and a 0.936. Well, let's see if maybe we can find the best parameters for our random forest classifier. So there are many different things I could do, but this is a little slow, so I'm just going to look at the criteria: Gini coefficient or entropy, information gain, maximum depth, and the minimum samples per leaf. So we run this, fit our grid search CV estimator. It does 5 folds for each of the possible candidate models, 250 fits altogether. The best score was 0.93, and this is not for a single test, but a 5-fold cross-validation, 0.93. Here are our best parameters, and here's our best estimator. And that estimator is equivalent to creating a random forest classifier with those parameters, which you can see here. Now, very often we just simply use the best estimator as our estimator moving forward. And here's our test data. Notice we're ready to look at our test data because we've developed a method for getting from the raw data to a solution. We're going to scale and then do a random forest using the best parameters we found in the grid search. So here's our pipeline. It's a simple pipeline. We do a standard scaler, then our best parameter random forest classifier. We fit the pipeline to the training data, which was features and target. And then we split the test into test features and test target, and then score and analyze the pipe just like it was any other estimator. So the pipeline was developed for and then fit to the training data. So the only place we see the test data is the scoring and prediction and analysis. So it's strictly used to assess. We don't develop the model on anything other than our training data. And now we can look at our cross-validation score, which is about a 0.9. This is on the test features and the test target. We can look at a receiver operating characteristic, and turns out we've done a pretty good job. But we're not finished. A model should do more than predict labels. It should enlighten, inform, sometimes even entertain. An interpretation is more than just metrics. Charge diagrams, histograms, illustrations, parameter estimates, sensitivity, stability, diagnostics, forecasts, predictions, feature selection and significance, hypothesis formation, science. So let's look at some science here. We have feature importance that we can get from a random forest classifier. This is a nice feature of a random forest. It uses each feature many times with many trees, and each time we use that feature, we look at the change in impurity, or if it's entropy, the information gain. So feature importances can be calculated as the mean or average decreased in purity. And if that was entropy, it would be the average information gain. Notice that when we plot this in a bar chart, that what stands out is the perimeter and the major axis length. Here they are, and we notice that they seem to have significant differences in their means when we saw them as histograms. Now we can actually restrict our data to these significant columns, and notice that we get a pretty good score using only these two features. In other words, we've done some science. We've shown that these two different types of rice can be distinguished based on perimeter and their major axis length. Maybe not something you can see just by looking at the picture. That is, data science is science. We could have actually obtained these results or similar to them using statistical tests like a t-test, for example. But the point is that the goal of predictive modeling in data science is not label prediction or just simple regression. It is to provide evidence for or against scientific hypotheses so as to advance human understanding. A rigid pipeline is similar to the scientific method and is a best practice for scientific reproducibility, as data science is part of science. So let's go beyond pipelines to stacked models. These are where we have multiple pipelines terminated by a final model. For example, the California housing data. Here you see our features. We have one categorical, which is ocean proximity, next to the end, and the last is the median house value. That's what we want to predict. The median income is in tens of thousands of dollars, house age is in years, average rooms, bedrooms, population, occupancy. Those are as you see there, and latitude and longitude, of course, are in degrees. Ocean proximity, and then the median house values are in hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we have our features, including one categorical, to predict our target. So this is a regression problem. We want to predict median house values, y hat, via a model, a function, with weights w from observations of the features. But there are three different types of features. There are numerical features, median income, house age, average room, average bedrooms, population, average occupancy. And then there are geospatial features, latitude and longitude, and there's the categorical feature. So there's three different types of models we should look at, but we're only going to look at two initially. And we're going to use the coefficient of determination, or the R squared, to see how good we're doing. Notice if the error was 0, the R squared would be 1. So the closer the R squared to 1, the better. First, let's look at the numerical plus the categorical. Using a random forest regressor, we did a grid search CV for the best parameters, and we ended up with this pipeline. We fit to the training data evaluated on the test data. The coefficient of determination, the R squared, is 0.6742. And remember, that's the pipeline applied to the test data, not to the training data. Next, we did geospatial, latitude and longitude. We imported nearest neighbors and did a grid search to find the optimal neighbors. Notice our metric here is Haversine. This is great circle distance between 2 points on the surface of a sphere. And we ended up with our pipeline. That get lat long was simply a custom thing that I did because we need to change degrees to radians in order to use Haversine distance. And the coefficient of determination for this model was 0.7974. So now that we have the two pipelines, we can stack them. As you see here, the two pipelines, our final estimator here is another random forest regressor. Our coefficient of determination, the R squared, is 0.8004. And that's bigger than the highest individual model score. And we can do even more stacking, with coefficient of determination scores improving as we do. So here we have 4 pipelines. The first is what would happen if somebody that didn't know data science just said, well, I know enough to standard scale the numerical and one-hot encode the categorical and apply a random forest. The second pipeline is our geospatial, the third is our numerical, and the fourth is a decision tree on our single categorical variable of ocean proximity. Here are their coefficients of determination. And for the entire stack of 4 pipelines with a final estimator of a random forest regressor, here is our coefficient of determination. It's better than we got with 2 pipelines stacked. These scores will keep improving as we stack more and more, although they may incrementally approach an upper limit that's well below 1. So pipelines and stacks, they're organizational tools. They allow multiple methods and models to be coordinated with each other. And stacked models are ensemble models, which means you could perform better than any individual model in the stack. You keep improving as you do more stacking. You can also have multiple uses of the features. Use them in multiple models. They are also layers of layers. A function model is a layer. So pipelines and stacks are actually compositions of functions. And in fact, all of this is a preview of deep learning models.